welcome to Meet the Artist at ACTV. Meet the Artist is sponsored by North Auburn Artists, which is a group of about 30 local artists in North Auburn, and they have been working together for about 20 years, and they host an annual Mother's Day studio tour. And today we are going to meet Marylee Drake, who is a quilt artist and a fabric artist. So thank you for joining us today, Marylee.
Thanks for inviting me, Trish. This is really exciting.
I'm so glad you could be here. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about how you became a quilter. So tell us about your history.
Well, I've always been a sewer. I learned to make clothing when I was young and a little girl, but I kind of put it away for a long time when I was raising my kids. And then about 20 years ago, I bought a new sewing machine. And when I took that took a class to learn how to make my machine, somebody said, "Have you thought about taking a quilting class?" And I took a quilting class, I fell in love, and that was the beginning of 20 years of really having a good time. For a long time, I was doing traditional quilts, and then I realized that I wanted to branch out a little bit and do more artistic quilts. And so that's kind of what I mainly do now.
So tell us a little bit about the difference between a traditional quilt and an artistic quilt.
Well, I think of a traditional quilt as being the kinds of quilts where you have a specific pattern, there's a specific suggestion for fabric. Traditional quilts are the kind of quilts that we used to see on our grandma's beds or our mother's maid, if you were lucky enough to have a mama that quilted. That's a traditional quilt. Artistic quilts or art quilts are generally quilts that don't have a pattern. You develop the pattern. You have an idea in your mind of what you'd like to portray in fabric, and you come up with your own pattern. So they're much more original than a traditional quilt.
Wow, so that sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
So let's start by talking about some of the quilts that you brought here today.
Okay.
Let's begin with this one. It's so beautiful. It has some roosters and some sunflowers and an old kind of dilapidated building. So tell us the process of creating this quilt.
Well, this quilt, I began it in French Lick, Indiana. There is a man there who is a quilt artist, and I went to French Lick for a class, and in the class I learned to paint fabric. So all of these fabrics, with the exception of the purple one, was a piece of white cloth, and he taught us how to apply paint to it to get a variety of colors.
Wow.
So in that class, and it was like a 3 or 4 day class, in that class I made some, this is supposed to portraying a cornstalk. So I made some cornstalk leaves, and I made one sunflower, and I made a pumpkin, and a couple of oak leaves, and it was a fun class. I came home, but what happened after about a year, I thought, I've got to finish that. Yeah. And so I went online, I found a picture of a barn that I could kind of do in fabric, and I found some roosters that I could make a pattern out of, and so the quilt kind of took shape after that, and the quilting on it was kind of fun. After I got all of these pieces on there, they were all ironed down. This is called fusible applique.
Okay.
Compared to some other kinds of appliques. So I ironed them all down, and then I began the quilting process on them. So what you're seeing here is done on my sewing machine.
Wow. And so when you are quilting this pattern to hold everything together, do you create that ahead of time? Is that something that you map out?
Well, some people do, but I don't. I kind of go, I wonder what goes in this little space here. And when I looked at that, in my mind, the barn was further back in the picture than, say, the pumpkins and stuff. And so what I did with that is I created a pathway.
Okay.
And my pathway was small back towards the barn, and then as it came forward, you know, it became larger. That was about the only planning I did, was just,
Wow.
you know, the pathway. And then I just kind of filled in with the rest of the quilting.
It's so incredible. So you're just freehand sewing this on your machine.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I don't mind. Some people, and they're excellent quilters, and I love what they do, but they mark everything, and I kind of sit down and the fabric kind of speaks to me. You know, it kind of says, you know, maybe you ought to put a little of this here, a little of that there. You know, so that's what I do. That's what I did with that quilt.
Well, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
And clearly you are an artist as well, with all of the painting that you've done on this.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's go ahead and we'll move on to the next quilt. Tell us a little bit. This one is so brilliant and beautiful. Tell us where you started with this one.
This one began as a bunch of blocks that were about 12 by 12, and they were bright colored. And every so often I'd get them out and I'd try to figure out what I was going to do with them, and I'd cut on them and sew them back together a little bit, and then I'd put them back. And finally I decided I need to go ahead and finish this. So what I did was I just started cutting blocks and recutting them and putting them together with other blocks, and it just it's another quilt that kind of evolved. And so this was kind of fun, and I had some very beautiful hand-dyed fabric, and I tried to showcase some of these pretty fabrics in these squares. So that's kind of how that quilt evolved.
So the hand-dyed fabric, that's something that you bought. You didn't hand-dye that yourself.
I do. I hand-dye fabric too, yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
But I know that you have quite a collection of fabric at home.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
I don't make all my own fabric, but sometimes I like that process too. That process is a lot of fun. So.
And so when you are, well, tell us a little bit about finding the right fabric when you are out, you know, in the world. What do you look for?
Well, one of the things that happens to me is I'll go into a store that sells commercially printed fabric, and I'll find a piece of fabric that's just beautiful, and I go, oh my God, I want that fabric. And in my mind, I don't have a plan for it. It's just a pretty piece of fabric, and I really like it. And so I'll bring it home and I'll tuck it away. So I'll look at it for a few days, and then I'll tuck it away somewhere, and then I kind of forget about it. And then some months later, I'll find a pattern that, you know, kind of inspires me, something that inspires me. And I go, wow, I think I have some fabric that would be perfect for whatever I'm being inspired by. And so then I will pull out that fabric and I'll think, you know, this would be good for this part of it. And then I go through my fabric and I find other things that kind of go together with that fabric that I bought a couple of months ago. And my quilts have a way of kind of evolving. You know, I don't always know what they're going to look like when I start, but I also know when they're done. I knew when it wasn't finished, and then I knew when it was done.
It's good to know.
And I stopped. And same thing with this one. I started doing the quilting on this, and I love this quilt because it's so bright colored, and the quilting was fun on it. And the background fabric, actually this background fabric I did not dye myself, but I bought it from somebody that hand dyes fabric. But
okay.
It was just a fun quilt to make.
Wow. Yeah, but it's so bright and colorful.
Thank you. Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about the quilt that is behind you. It looks like an African print.
The African quilt. So I don't know if they still do it, but in Petaluma they have a street fair every year, and there were a group of ladies who were selling African panels that were, this is a batiking process, and they had these panels that were made by some ladies in Africa, and they were there selling their panels. So I bought the panel This is the panel, and for a long time it sat at home waiting for my inspiration, and then I came across this other fabric and the colors went with it so well, so I started putting it together. And when I did that, it kind of spoke to me, and it said, I need beads. So I went through my bead collection and I found some beads that I hung on there, and then I put some other beads on it, and that's kind of, it's another evolved quilt.
Right. And so these are not the kind of quilts that you would put on your bed, right? These are too fancy.
These are called wall art.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've run out of wall art space at home, so.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go ahead and tell us about this beautiful quilt.
Oh, well, this quilt, this was a really fun quilt to make. It has, it looks like I pieced together a lot of bright colors, but actually the fabric came like that. It was striped fabric, and then I cut it into triangles and then sewed it back together again.
Okay.
So that's kind of, and it is in almost a circle. And then when I got it put together, it has black on it that you can see, and then I put this around it, and then I kind of got wild and crazy with all the quilting on it. So
yeah, I love the bright colors that you used for the thread.
yeah, this was a really fun quilt. Yeah, and it's pretty original. There is a pattern to make a quilt like this, but it's not the kind of pattern where it says go buy this fabric and do this thing. You know?
Right, right. So it's more out of your
out of my mind, yeah.
That's just incredible to me.
Thank you.
So, and then this one I know was a collaboration, is that right?
Yeah, it's a collaboration. In the quilting world, one of the things that we do, maybe you can help me open it up a little bit. One of the things that we like to do is we like to challenge each other. And this quilt was kind of a challenge. Where we get together in a group of people and each of us do a certain part of the quilt. And this part right here, and I kind of am the queen of the last minute. And what I did with this, I was supposed to have a quilt block for our get-together the next day, and I hadn't done anything yet. So I went downstairs and I pulled some fabric and I put together this block.
Okay.
And I went, whew, and I took it to the get-together and I passed it over. And then I didn't see it again for about 6 months. And when it came back to me, someone else had done this part of it.
Okay.
And another person had done the outside part. And then the last person said, I can't think of anything else to do, so I'm going to put this little border on it.
Oh, it's so sweet.
And she even came over to my house and she said, do you have any more of that fabric with the little squares on it? Because she really liked that. So they presented it to me, and all of us were working on each other's quilts. So during that time, that 6-month period of time, I was working on somebody else's quilt and then another person's quilt. And so when this came back to me, it was a surprise because I didn't know what it was going to look like.
Oh, and it's so beautiful.
Thank you.
I love the way everybody, I mean, everything just came together.
And it comes back as a finished top, and then what I did is I put a backing on it, and I love this backing. It's like the perfect backing. And then I quilted it. So all the quilting on it is mine, but the outside areas were put together by somebody else.
Wow. That, I mean, they say that when you collaborate that it's, you know, so much more beautiful than anything you can do.
It can be very nice. There have been some times where the collaboration was a horrible failure, and those are the kinds of quilts that get kicked to the curb.
But you learn from them, right?
You do, yeah, you learn from them. Yeah.
This is beautiful.
Okay, so I get rid of that one.
Okay. And then how about, do you want to tell us about this one with the polka dots?
Oh, okay. This quilt, I'm in a little group of gals, and
let's hold it up a little bit more.
And we have been going through a book where we're learning to design quilts. And the exercise was there were two lines of words. One of them was a noun, or there were nouns and verbs to pick from.
Okay.
And again, I waited till the last minute, and so the night before we were supposed to have something ready, I went in and I picked amoeba and interlocking. Those
Okay.
were my two words.
Yes, so you
and
can
so
see it.
I drew amoeba and I made them interlock. And I did this in one evening, and this again is fused.
Okay.
And it's not finished,
Right.
but it started. And there's still a lot more work to do on it. But this one is not a collaboration like this one. Only I will work on this one.
Okay.
But other people were doing similar things, and they came up with some really creative ideas too. But I really like mine, and I think it's going to be fun to finish.
It is really fun.
Yeah.
And I love the green that you've
Thank
added
you.
to
Yeah.
contrast the black and white.
Yeah.
And so these are all just freehand drawn
yeah,
amoebas.
kind of amoeba. I looked online for an amoeba, and basically amoeba are single cell, colorless entities with
okay.
a nucleus, and that's what we have here. So
Yeah, that's really cool.
yeah.
Right. And then I think you have some gears. Oh no, this is your.
Oh,
this is your. I was thinking.
I know. Okay, this one was a challenge, and in the Quilt Guild, I belong to a quilt guild, the Foothill Quilters Guild here in Auburn, and every year we have a challenge, and I forget what the name of the challenge was, but I live near the Stagecoach Trail, and so this quilt is titled Springtime on the Stagecoach Trail.
Okay.
And these are wildflowers, and that is kind of portraying decomposed granite.
Oh, I love that.
So yeah, and this was fun to do, and using all these different colors, and I haven't seen too many wildflowers that look like this on Stagecoach Trail, but they could. They could.
They're an abstract version.
Yeah.
I was just out there yesterday and I saw Queen Anne's lace, and it
There
kind
you
of reminds me of
go.
this
Yeah.
shape.
Yeah.
And I love this quilting thread because you can see it so well.
Yeah.
All of your
And it's variegated, so it kind of goes from light green to dark green, and the quilting in here the same way. I love the quilting. This is not, I didn't mark it beforehand. I just kind of, let my fingers do the walking around, how I wanted to do the quilt. So.
Well, it's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. And, sometimes the back of the quilt is as pretty as the front of the quilt, and this one was this is actually not hand-dyed fabric. This is a print of hand-dyed fabric that I bought, and it's really fun to put these really bright colors on the back of your quilts.
Yeah.
Much better than old muslin or something. So, yeah, thank you.
And then you have brought some pieces that show what the inside looks like, right? So there's so much work that we don't see on the inside of the quilt.
And let me say a little bit about, can I talk about buying all
Of
this
course.
Asian fabric?
Yes, of course.
Okay. My husband and I had gone up the Oregon coast, and we stopped at every quilt store. He's very tolerant. We stopped at every quilt store that was open on our trip, and I would go in, and I was looking for Asian fabric, and so I came home with quite a bundle of Asian fabric.
And so by Asian fabric, you mean it was created in Japan?
It has an Asian theme.
Okay.
And Asian fabric looks different than our fabric, and a lot of it has been produced in Japan.
Okay.
So that is kind of what makes it. It has a different feel to it, and usually the designs are very Asian looking.
Okay.
So I have this whole drawer of Asian fabric, and I've made a few things with it, but I'd gone to a quilt show in Folsom in February, and this quilt, a quilt just like this, was displayed, and I thought, I have that pattern at home, and I came home, that was on Saturday, I came home and I cut out all my little squares, and I cut out all these, And over the weekend, I put the quilt together. It went together really quickly because I was really motivated. So the quilt is not done.
And this is a big quilt.
It is a big quilt, yeah. And so this is called a quilt top when it's not finished. And the next thing, after I got this quilt top made, I was going through all my fabric to see if maybe I could find a backing fabric for it. And I found this.
Oh, wow. And you just had that in your fabric
I had that. It was one of those fabrics that I saw, and I thought, oh, this would be kind of fun for something.
Right.
And I actually got enough that it can be the backing for this quilt.
Wow. Yeah. That's wonderful.
So that was really fun. And I know you kind of wanted to see, you know, what the inside of a quilt looks like.
Right.
And I thought about pressing this so it would be pristine, but I didn't. Anyway, but you know, when I'm putting a quilt together, it's important that all the corners match, and you know, that as I sew, I do a good job with getting all the seams even and everything. But this is kind of what the back of a quilt looks like.
And there also is some ironing that is involved.
Yeah, a lot of ironing, because if you don't press everything down flat when you try to quilt it, you get lumps and stuff. So yeah.
Wow.
So this one's had a lot of pressing, and it'll get more pressing before I quilt it, because I want it to lay really flat.
Right.
So.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah. So that's this quilt, and
then
Okay, since I interrupted you, what is the act of quilting?
Okay, I see. So tell us, what exactly is quilting? What does that mean?
Okay, well, what quilting means is you have 3 pieces of material.
Okay.
You have your quilt top, and you have your quilt back, and in the middle you have batting. And batting can be anything. It can be wool. And I think the quilt behind you that we haven't talked about yet has a wool bat. It can be polyester, which gives you a real puffiness. It can be a blend of cotton and polyester. And what the quilting is you put those 3 pieces of material together and you quilt it. You do the sewing. And quilts don't always have to be sewn by machine. They can be hand sewn, and many of the early quilts that our grandmothers did, because they may not have had access to a sewing machine, is they pieced their quilts. Piecing is when you put all these little pieces of fiber or fabric together. So they may have hand pieced their quilts, and then they put them together, and they will either hand quilt them, very beautiful small stitches, or they'll tie them.
Okay.
And what tying means is they take a piece of double thread about that long, and they go in and out and in and out, and then they tie a knot on the top.
Okay.
And some of us that have seen older quilts, we see the hand-tied quilts. So.
Right. And there are special quilting sewing machines.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And do you have one?
No. I have a sewing machine that I use mainly for making quilts. I have another sewing machine that it's kind of a special machine. I only use it for doing the this is called free motion quilting. But there is a third thing that people use, and it's called a long arm machine.
Okay.
And the long arm refers to the length from the back of the machine to where the needle is. And on long arm machines, the process is much different than what I do. Okay. And what I'm doing is I am moving my fabric underneath the sewing machine needle when I quilt.
Okay.
In a long arm machine, your quilts are rolled onto rollers, and the sewing machine moves back and forth across the top of the quilt.
Oh.
So you can get some beautifully complex designs, and you can work on really big quilts. It's hard for me to work on anything much bigger than this, because you're having to mash it into a smaller area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and talk about this one.
Okay. This quilt was made, I made a bunch of blocks, and each, like one block was all red, one block was all green, one block was all whatever. And then I had a design and I cut each block the same, and then I interchanged I interchanged all the fabrics, so I got all these kind of wild looking things. But that's what this quilt is. And this again is, it's a wall hanging. And it's just kind of a wild looking thing.
It kind of reminds me of Andy Warhol, I think.
It does, yeah. It does kind of have that look to it.
Really neat. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And then you have one more that you have hand painted. Is
Oh,
that right?
yeah, yeah.
So tell us about this one.
This is, I use stencils, and a stencil is a piece of plastic that has holes cut in it.
Okay.
And so I used paint sticks, which are called Shiva sticks, and it's oil paint in stick form. And I used that to fill in the color, and then it takes about 3 or 4 days for it to dry, and after it dried, I quilted it.
Okay, so you started with sort of like a blank canvas.
I did. It's
And
a blank fabric canvas.
Okay, and painted it, and then sewed around where you had painted.
Yes,
basically.
yes,
Okay,
yeah.
it's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
I love
you.
it. And so you belong to several local groups?
I do.
Is that right?
Well, yeah, I belong to the Foothill Quilters Guild. For a while there's another guild in Loomis, and I belong to that guild for a while. I don't get a chance to go very often anymore. And then I belong to a couple of small groups.
Okay.
And one of the small groups is pretty much focused on making art quilts. And the other group is it's a friendship group. We get together once a month, and sometimes we get around to quilting, and sometimes we just have dinner and yak, which is kind of nice too.
Yes.
So.
And about how long does it take you to make a quilt?
Well, since I don't just sit down and make it till I'm done,
Right.
It's kind of hard to judge that. This one took a long time because I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I have a design wall in my sewing room, and I will work on a quilt until I kind of run out of ideas. And then what I do is I just hang it up on that design wall until I'm inspired again. And so it may take a week or two, and I'll come down and go, oh, I want to put roosters on this quilt or whatever, So it could take several months.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you know when it's done. So that's
I know
good.
when it's done, and I know when it's not done. And my husband is a good critic because he will go through my sewing room on the way out to the garage to get a beer or whatever. Yes, he does drink beer. And he will say, have you thought about putting some blah, blah, blah on that quilt? And sometimes I go, thank you very much. And other times I go, wow, that's a great idea. So another collaboration.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. It's nice that he's helpful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for
thank
being
you.
here, Marylee. It was great to talk with you. And thank you so much for watching us. This is the first episode of Meet the Local Artist, sponsored by North Auburn Artists. And we're happy to have you, and we hope that you will watch many more of our episodes in the future.